In the previous 2 episodes of Build, we talked about why even if you have an idea, you might not get investment from it. And it needs to be a big idea in order to even attract interest. But even if it's a big idea, chances are investors aren't going to say yes. And in today's Build episode, we're going to uncover all the reasons an investor may say no to your big idea. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. In each episode, innovators and I debunk a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. Now, one misconception that a lot of first-time founders fall prey to is if they have a big idea, some investor is going to want to put capital and fund it. But the truth is that a lot of founders face no's. And just because they face no's doesn't mean that someone won't eventually invest in them. In today's Build episode, we're going to explore all the reasons that investors may say no to your big idea. And to help us out, I've invited both Ooshma Garg and Danielle Morrill. Ooshma is CEO and founder of Gobble, and Danielle is CEO and founder of Mattermark. And they've both recently become investment partners at X Factor, an investment firm that's focused on investing in female founders and mixed-gendered teams. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So we've come a long way since that first South by Southwest where we all shared a hotel room in 2010, and all of us have gone out and fundraised a number of times. So I want to start by asking the two of you, what was that first no like that you got from an investor?
I was bummed. I mean, I think the first 10 investment meetings were just no's back to back. So at first you're like, I guess that would happen. I would get a no. But I'm kind of the straight A's type kid. Right. I keep thinking, of course I would get a yes every time. And then after you get them over and over, you're like, oh, maybe this just happens. Maybe this is true that you get way more no's than yeses. What do you think?
Man, your company is like your baby. It's a reflection of yourself. So the first no and even ongoing no's, they're always so personal. I think you get a little bit used to it because you just build some armor and build some strength every day and every year as an entrepreneur. But especially in the very beginning, it's kind of like a survival of the fittest process. You have to be able to psychologically get through the no's, take some feedback, and develop that never quit attitude early on if you're going to, be successful ultimately.
Yeah. So how did you get over that? How do you even know that you should just take the feedback, deal with the rejection, and keep going?
I've made a fundraising playlist on Spotify.
Okay.
I think it's Jay-Z who says, on to the next one.
Yeah.
I used to blast that song after every pitch, actually after the good ones too. But honestly, you kind of just have to keep living. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is just putting it in context with the rest of your life. So having a playlist from you is sort of a reminder of life just kind of goes on. It's fun with your team too. I think to just be, I guess not everyone does this, but with my team at the very early stage, it's not like you can hide the fact you got turned down. So, I mean, later on when you're raising, maybe you don't tell everybody that you're raising a Series A, but when you're raising early stage money, you get your team to cheer you up. They buy you beers. You do silly things. You kind of have to let life keep happening so that it doesn't get too serious.
Yeah, I agree. So what's funny is my fundraising song is Survivor by Destiny's Child.
Yeah. How many people do you think have a fundraising song?
I don't know.
We need to make a playlist.
We need to make a playlist.
That's a good idea. We'll link the playlist to you guys. So do you ever go back to the people that said no? Right? Because you guys have done multiple rounds now where you might have had to go back to those early investors who said no.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in our case, even our first check as a seed investment, it took me, 3 different introductions, multiple follow-ups to even get in the door before the no. And then after someone says no, that it feels very final, but I think that the big secret is that you have to go back and that you should keep following up. And time again, I hear friends talk about, Series A, Series Bs, and so on, where they got a no. They were they kind of welcomed it and took all the feedback. They updated different investors every week for 2 months, 3 months, sometimes 6 months, and then they closed that same investor. And they might be a Sequoia or an Andreessen Horowitz or what have you. All those funds are looking for stamina and looking for breakout businesses. And a breakout business has to have someone that's willing to listen, iterate, and improve. And so the funny thing is you should see that as just the beginning of your relationship. And for our venture financings, we had multiple failed fundraising attempts and then ultimately successful ones. And our funds that invested us now, Andreessen Horowitz, Trinity Ventures, et cetera, absolutely said no once or twice before, but I maintained that relationship.
Yeah.
What about, you think about it like sales? Like, would you never contact a lead again because they didn't convert at the end of the trial? No. Like, if you are in my database, I'm going to be talking to you for the rest of your life. Like, if you're in this business, there's a certain set of investors that you really want to work with. And frankly, they're looking for the people who don't take it so hard that they never come back, to your point about stamina.
Yep.
And I think also once you go back to people a few times and kind of you have that feeling of like, this feels like it's against the rules to go back, then you realize that it's actually respected. And so it's a self-fulfilling thing, and you start to find yourself going back more and more.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's great that you got feedback, but I think a lot of times you get this generic feedback where it's like, I want to see more traction. And you're like, I'm already at, 10K in monthly recurring revenue, or I'm already at like $1 million run rate. Like, how much more traction do you want to see, right? So how can you kind of push an investor to give you more directed feedback?
Yeah.
In that note.
Well, I mean, I think we sit on both sides of the table now. So I think sometimes it's laziness that causes people to ask for these things. So for example, that I want to see more traction. It's kind of like going into Macy's and being like, why isn't this a Dior dress? It's like, okay, if you want a Dior dress, maybe you should go buy one. Like, if you want to find a company that has like $5 million a year of revenue and you're at seed stage, like, sorry, this is what we have. This is what I'm selling. And if it's not what you're interested in, it's fine for you to turn me down. But I'm not like, this is not a buffet where you can come back anytime between 10 and 1. Like, I'm trying to do a raise around. And you kind of have to, at least inside, hold a certain amount of entitlement over your time. It's not that you need to be entitled to their money. But you're running a process. And I think that that is really important. So for a lot of these unclear feedbacks, I think it's more important to say, like, what do you think of what I'm selling now? And if it's not clear what I'm selling, let me remind you. And redirect, because honestly, like, you have just as much a right to claim your time as they do.
Absolutely. And you have to kind of like, draft or pick your draft in a way with your investors. There are ones that I really want to follow up with and I would love to work with. And it's not just, from my side of the table. I think just like with employees or anyone else or with a relationship, you want it to be good with both sides. So you might see something that they don't, but they've only known you for 30 minutes. You've done all your homework. You know what they've invested in. You know the other founders. So you don't just follow up with everyone. You hear the no's. Sometimes it's not even worth following up. Sometimes it was an introduction and you didn't really connect. The no is okay. Other times it comes with something that says, our fund requires X, Y, or Z. Someone at this stage. We need this much ownership. It's important to know what's a kind of a BS no and what's actually a valid no. And sometimes it took me a long time to learn that funds vary drastically in size, and that actually has a huge impact on who can invest you at different times in your life cycle. So timing is important.
Hold that thought. We're gonna come back to that in a little bit. The whole fund size and what makes sense and what it doesn't. So, but let's go on to some of the more easy things that you hear and you might get rejected. So I don't know if either of you have faced this, but the whole, you don't have a technical co-founder. And somehow that's like a gating factor to even get $1 out of this investor, right? You hear things like this where you're just not meeting a certain checkbox. What's been your response to that sort of stuff?
Well, it depends on the checkbox. Basically what I would say for technical co-founder or a lot of these is they're like risk boxes. And so each one, like, it's almost like if it was a survey and you added up enough points and there's too much risk here. It's probably no one reason that's going to knock you out, but they're trying to figure out like where you fit. So technical co-founder is not necessarily a problem if you nail everything else, but if you don't have a product and there's no one to build it, then of course that's going to be expensive. So I think it's sometimes the way it seems to be coming across from the investor is like it's a checkbox thing, but they're really like trying to ask a bigger question. So I think one thing I've found is that it's good to say, well, like, tell me more about why you're worried about that, rather than just like answering the question, like making them elucidate more. Because I've been surprised by some of the answers that I get. You know, the technical co-founder question, I think the assumption is who's going to build the product. And they might just be thinking, dang, we're going to need to go raise a big round because you need to hire 2 or 3 engineers instead of building it yourself.
Right.
And they're not actually worried about you not being technical. They don't care that you're not technical. They're more like, okay, so now I have to assess fundraising risk because this person's going to need to go build a team. So it's easy to think it's about you and, oh, you can't code. And then you kind of like lock down and feel guilty. But I think that's not always the case. A lot of these things are not actually what they seem on the surface.
Right. Yeah. I think another one along those lines is also, why are you working on this idea, right? So it's what puts you in that unique position to kind of own domain expertise. So have you guys ever gotten that question, like, why gobble Ooshma? Why help people with cooking at the end of their day?
Right. Well, Gobble is a lucky one for me because it's a mission-driven company, and it started out of my family. And what we do is we help people, cook home-cooked food in 15 minutes in one pan, and we bring this tradition and ritual and love of a household into the modern busy life. And that's something that's very near and dear to me. So because of that, it shows that I'm just going to give it my all and not quit. I think some folks stumble on an opportunity sometimes.
Right.
You are, you're just a, inventor, and you want to tinker around and you try finding, what's going to fit in today's zeitgeist. Just like founders come in different flavors, I think investors come in different flavors too. There are investors who are great at investing in arbitrage opportunities. There's investors who really want to back founders or social good or mission-driven folks, or they want to back moonshoots. Or some people want to back things that have a linear, direct, immediate path to growth. So I think having that context when you assess someone's response to you is really important, because you kind of, just like with your friends, you have to find your tribe with your investors as well.
Yeah. So there's definitely this like sizing up thing. And I think one of the early signals is they don't feel like your market is big enough, maybe because they're not aware of that market, or maybe they don't get the space. So have either of you had that situation where you come in, you've already got traction, you've got the go-to market team, products in the hand of customers, and they're just kind of scratching their head like, oh, is food, do people eat dinner still these days? Like, is that still a thing? Right? How do you deal? Yeah.
I actually don't think it's worthwhile to continue to have the conversation. And I have to shout out to Hunter Walk, who wrote an excellent post about this. I don't know if you guys saw, around a woman who was pitching, and someone said, like, convince me this market's big enough. And she just said, look, I don't want to work that hard. I've already got traction. People eat dinner. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I think there are times when you're looking at this investor, and you have to consider, like, if they don't get it at this point, especially if you're doing something where you have traction, and it's like fairly obvious that the market is big. I mean, most of us, if you're building breakthrough tech, you might find a situation where markets are unclear in terms of size, like blockchain, for example. But in most cases, these are professional investors. And they may be testing you, and they might want to know what you know, so it's worthwhile to at least give them, a rough answer. But I would take it as serious data if they need to be convinced that the market's big enough. The other side is that not all markets need to be big to be interesting. It's more about if you can create something that can grow. So obviously, creating a market that doesn't exist is a really valuable thing. So again, I think it goes back to flipping the script a little bit in terms of trying to make sure you understand what they're really getting at. Like, do they not know? Are they testing you? Are they going to be a huge waste of your time?
How can you kind of suss that out? Are there questions or techniques?
I mean, I would just start getting curious, like, how much do you know about the market? Have you invested in this space? Like, obviously you're interested in us, like, what do you think? And it doesn't have to become combative. It's much more of just like, how does this become a dialogue instead of like playing 20 questions where you're doing all the talking? I think about it kind of like a job interview. And I think in both parties are confused about who's interviewing who, and you really want to make sure that you find a balance where it's not like you as the founder talking 80% of the time.
But framing is so important. So if you're getting some feedback, repetitively that I don't understand your market, or I don't understand your path forward, or your path to revenue, or how you're going to hire, then you do have to, take that feedback and try to iterate and improve your pitch itself. And I think that every company, it's very hard that you meet a perfect de-risked company at an early stage. They all have some many risks and oftentimes one big risk. So sometimes it's, wow, there isn't a market for this, but we see that being the future.
Right.
Other times there's a really big market, but maybe it's crowded. So the question is, how are you going to be, for example, defensible in the food space? And other times, it's you have something defensible and proprietary. It's a huge market, but no one's willing to pay for it. And so people aren't willing to pay for music or TV or whatever. So how are you even going to make money for something that everybody's using? So whether it's revenue, market, defensibility, IP, every business typically gets stuck, I find, on one big discussion. And the better you can hone your slide and your couple lines to make sure that your message is getting across properly and that resonates, it's just to your advantage. Because people have such limited time with you and attention span.
Right.
You know what is going to be the hot button of your pitch. So kind of identifying that early and practicing that part the most would probably do you well.
Yeah. So we previously had Marie Perruchet on the show, and she talked about taking your pitch and then seeing how other people reformulate it, or what are the pieces that they extract. And that usually becomes these hot buttons, or the thing that is most memorable that maybe you need to dive into. Are there other ways that you guys have found to extract that information?
I think reformulating, literally having someone pitch it back to you. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, as one technique to what's sticky, what is impactful. But then there's the other case of, what is the hot button that people are probably going to step away from?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that is really interesting is whenever you're opening the conversation with an investor at the very beginning, if you can get them to tell you, hey, what do you know about my company? Because that actually is going to tell you a ton about what they've already decided you're doing. And it's sometimes really wrong. Or it's there's a lot there, and then you can kind of work from there. And if you notice that pretty consistently people are having the wrong idea, I mean, kind of to your point about feedback, it's another way of getting, because the reality is people act like you set up your pitch and then you go out, but you actually create your pitch, start to go out, and then you're continuously iterating on the pitch. Right. So you have so many opportunities to make the pitch better. I actually look at the first 10 pitches or so. I kind of set up pitches with targets where I would be interested in working with them, but they're not my top picks, so that I'm actually running the pitch against those folks. Yeah. And that way, if the first 3 or 4 say that their first impression of you is different, then you can realize the market already knows who I am. Very rarely do you get to just go pitch and no one knows who you are. So that's another tactic that I think can be really helpful.
So coming back to kind of Ooshma's point around finding investors who fit into, one of many opportunities like arbitrage, moonshots, love the space, etc. There's also people who really get beholden to certain stages, right? They're like, oh, come back and talk to me once you've figured out your customer acquisition cost or your lifetime value, right? Are there ways in which you've been able to address that even if you don't have those metrics yet?
One concept I keep running back to is that MVP concept, or, minimum viable product, or even prototype. And so with my first company, the vision was to make this recruiting platform for universities all around the country. And I started by making wireframes and envisioning the product and keeping it simple, but thinking through those wireframes. But then an advisor kind of looked at that, told me to scrap the whole thing, and said, why can't you just start with a mailing list? You're making a recruiting platform. Why don't we just see if there's people interested in your concept, and can you get 10,000 people or 50,000 people or how many ever students on your mailing list? And at first I was offended because I thought, oh my gosh, a mailing list is not a tech company. But oftentimes you can think about some scrappy proxy or prototype to prove what the person is asking, even if you don't have that exact number or kind of the software or resources to get what exactly they want.
So what's an example? Yeah, if somebody throws out Ooshma, early days, 3 years ago, what was your LTV? And you're like, I don't have an LTV because I don't know. What would your response be to that?
Yeah, I'd probably do 2 things. And so one is I would look at comparables in the market. And so just doing studies of the general food industry, and in my case, how often people order takeout, or what are people paying for SaaS for these particular products each day, or whatever's relevant to your market. I'm assuming that you have some prototype.
Right.
Very few companies pitch pre-product.
Right.
So whatever data you have for 3 months or 6 months, there has to be something there, some monthly active users, how many times people are logging in, how many purchases people have made. So you just have to, our seed round was raised off of 2 to 3 months of early prototype data. And I think that's all you need. So it's just some prototype that shows some user willingness to pay or engage for 3 months. And then you can extrapolate that into your vision.
Now, there's obviously times where people may disagree, right? They may say something like, you know what, Danielle, I don't like your distribution strategy. I really just don't think it's going to work. So, because I think it's going to be expensive. Come back when you've figured out something that's a little bit cheaper. Then let's have the conversation. But for now, no.
Seems like an opportunity for them to prove their value added as an investor.
Okay.
I think that's valid for people to challenge strategy. But I think what I would want to know in that situation is, if you were my investor, what would you suggest that I do? I totally hear your concerns. Make sure to show them that you're listening. But I think that's their opportunity to step up and actually offer something constructive. I think if they're going to be an investor where you're going to be critical without being constructive, that's actually data for you.
Yeah.
The truth is that strategy is tough. strategy often breaks down, and we change strategy all the time in startups. That's like a huge part of what you're testing. So I think being gracious and not taking it personally is important, but also making sure that you're asking them to demonstrate their value. And I actually think that's going to make them want to work with you. If that goes well, that's actually going to be a way to test out what would this working relationship be. So I think see it as an opportunity.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And most people they send you that no via email.
Right.
And I'm sure that the large majority don't even ask further questions. Some may not even respond, and others might respond and say, thanks for your time, I'll move on. But some small percentage are asking follow-up questions. And I think that's just making them stand out and starting that relationship that we said is so important. So I think that if you really did like someone and their no isn't tactical or directional enough for you, to ask for a 10-minute phone call just to get a little bit more detail or their advice on strategy towards, de-risking that investor's concern, I think can go a really long way. So I think folks should just practice sort of embracing the no and getting that 10-minute call and feedback as much as possible, because that will help give them building blocks for another 3 months if they can, and not just sort of wander aimlessly wondering what someone was saying, or worse, completely ignoring it.
Yeah.
Right. If you're going to go and worry a bunch about the feedback but not ask for the follow-up, go round and round in circles over 3 glasses of wine, it would be much less painful to just have that awkward 10-minute call and just know where you stand. And I think I've seen founders go in circles over this stuff. Literally years later, they'll tell these stories.
Sure.
It's just not worth the energy.
No. Yeah.
And the investor is also probably super uncomfortable giving the rejection. We're going to talk a little bit about saying no on our other side, but so they're kind of beholden to you to give you that 10 minutes, honestly. So you should take it.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of times where it's very obvious. They tell you here's the no, and aside from some of the ambiguous feedback around the traction, there are times though where they may see a signal. Maybe it's something that happened in a meeting between you and your co-founder, or something else. Maybe they did some back channeling, right? How do you handle those situations where they might feel like, oh, there's no chemistry, or I'm not sure where this is going?
It's tough because they usually don't tell you.
Right. Yeah, they usually don't tell you. And I think that's quite rare as well. And I think the best way to handle that or avoid that is actually to construct your own back channeling.
Okay.
So like I said, some of the biggest investors, they will only invest based upon referral. And then when you get so kind of well known and in high demand, they'll only invest based upon 2 or 3 referrals. So every single step is just hard work. You can't ask for 1 intro. You can't just take the no on face value. You have to ask for 3 intros. Then you have to ask for follow-ups. Then you go to the meeting. Then you follow up on the meeting. And if they say no, you follow up again. So there's all those little extra steps that other people are doing that I think more folks should know about.
Yeah, and invest their energy in that versus what Danielle said around the drama in their heads.
Yeah.
So anything else you guys have heard from your experience? Any other no's that we maybe haven't covered? I know there was some of the stuff that Ooshma was talking about, like the type of investors, so maybe we can dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think... Well, with regards to the no's that people give, one of the toughest ones is simply just environmental. Like there are times when you're starting a company and it's just a rough funding environment, or it's just rough for your market. There might be bigger companies who are, for whatever reason, they're not doing well on the public markets, and that's affecting you. And so, like the stamina, managing your psychology, being frugal, focusing on just, the minimum prototypes, all of that's so important because the main thing you need to get to yes and get funding is time. So, and you can correct a lot of things in the no's over time, but there are some environmental factors you just have to weather.
Yeah. Let's dig into that a little bit more. What do you mean by like public companies? How does that impact me? I'm just a 2-person startup. Why should I care what Google or Facebook is up to?
Yeah, well, hopefully your aspiration is to be, a big public company or to just be a big organization in general, and to be, one day going from wherever you are to making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of value for your shareholders, for your employees, for your customers, and so on. So investors will look at the current state of the market, at the public market, to understand what's happening in your industry. How are those companies valued? What are your chances of getting there, of breaking out? What is it going to look like when you IPO? And that trickles all the way down and influences your valuation even as early as at the seed stage.
Right.
So it's very well advised to not be delusional and to take a look at the the public markets of your industry, and be able to speak to that. I think people will be very impressed.
Yeah. I think another situation is often we have to pay for previous mistakes. So the investor might have invested in a space when it was too young, or maybe the founders that they invested in weren't that knowledgeable or were the first, just a number of factors to where now they just aren't willing to look at the space. Or even no matter like how amazing you are, they're like, nope, sorry, not interested in the space. You might be an amazing unicorn person, but I'm just going to say no.
I would take that no. It's kind of like in relationships. Someone had some issues with another girl that looked like you or whatever. Like that is not the best guy for you.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And so there are many investor fish in the sea. And I think that's just when the numbers game comes into play. And you have to make sure that you're not just talking to 5. You're not talking to 10, but you have a big target list that you're just setting up and rolling through.
Awesome.
I think other thing that is valid but complicated is people might say to you, this isn't venture backable.
Yeah.
I actually think that's very helpful feedback to hear. Whether you agree is sort of beside the point. Find out why they think that. Sometimes investors know things about markets that you can't learn until you're in them for a long time.
Right.
And they can save you years of your life.
Yeah.
And so like part of why people get a bad taste in their mouth often has to do with like a poor margin business that can never get better. Or a business that caps out somewhere and there's this like trough of sorrow that seems to go on forever and ever, and you don't get to find out until you're a $50 million company, which is great, except for when you have a huge burn rate and expectations. So especially if you're entering a market where you're fairly new, maybe you're a software-centric person, but you don't have domain expertise, those types of no's can tell you a ton about things that it's easy to say, well, I don't care. If I get to $50 million of revenue, I'll deal with that then.
Yeah. And
you can still make that decision. But I think the key is to actually make sure you understand that no, because they are in the business of billion-dollar outcomes.
Right.
They might know something that you don't, and they might be able to help you redirect towards something that is worth it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Danielle and Ooshma, for walking us through all those no's. For all of you out there who are watching, if there was a no that you recently received that maybe we didn't unpack, feel free to share it with us in the comments below this video. That's it for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we'll continue the conversation and talk about what it's going to take to get that yes from an investor. Ciao for now. This episode of Build is brought to you by our sponsor, Pivotal Tracker. Welcome to FemGeniere's Confident Communicator course introductory video series. I'm Purnima Vijay-Shankar, the founder of FemGeniere.
And I'm Karen Catlin, a former tech executive who's now an advocate for women who are working in the tech industry.
For the last 22 years, I have been speaking in public, and for the last 8 within the tech industry. I have given a TEDx talk, I've been a guest lecturer at Duke's Pratt School of Engineering, an entrepreneur in residence at 500 Startups, a mentor in residence at Techstars, and was the founding engineer of Mint.com.
I am on my second career. In my first career, I spent 25 years building software products. I started out as a software engineer and over time moved to the executive level, where I was a vice president at Adobe Systems. Now, in my second career, I'm an advocate for women, which means I do a lot of public speaking about diversity, about women's leadership topics, and I've given a TEDx talk.
The Confident Communicator course is a live online course that Karen and I co-teach together. In this video series, we're going to give you a sense of what the Confident Communicator course is and what you'll get out of it.
You'll learn about the challenges Purnima and I have faced learning the craft of public speaking ourselves. You'll learn why we decided we just couldn't keep all of this knowledge to ourselves, and you'll hear from students who have taken the class about how they have become more confident communicators.
You're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at the entire course. You'll meet some past students and see how they went from being shy and nervous to poised and confident communicators. You're also going to meet employers and sponsors who found the course valuable enough to invest in and send their people. And finally, you'll get some sample lessons so you know the material that we're going to be covering. Sign up below to receive the first lesson immediately, where you'll understand why it's not good enough to just be heads down. You need to speak up to get the recognition you deserve. Ciao for now.